40 years from now, most of the Justice League is already gone. Not retired, gone. Killed off one by one in a future nobody in the present timeline is supposed to see coming. The team that's left holding the line is smaller than it's ever been. An old man in a cape, a kid wearing his mask, and a grown man who used to zap bullies with a homemade gauntlet in Dakota City. Two of them are Batman. The third one is Static. Somewhere in the wreckage of that future, a teammate asks how a guy with lightning powers from a canceled Saturday morning cartoon ended up one of the last members of the Justice League. Nobody in that scene has an answer, but the answer had already been given decades earlier by the one person who never doubted it for a second. And it wasn't Batman, and it wasn't Superman. It was Richie Foley, Gear. And today we're looking at how Static Shock quietly proved its own best friend right. One cancellation, one snub, and one 20-year comeback at a time. Here's the claim first, so you know what we're building toward. From the very first episode, Gear treated Virgil Hawkins like he was destined to be one of the greatest heroes DC ever made. Not a sidekick story, not a diversity checkbox, the real thing. And for most of the show's run, and most of the 2 decades after it ended, almost nobody outside that abandoned gas station agreed with him. Start with why that read was so easy to dismiss. Superman has an entire mythology built around being chosen, sent from a dying planet, raised for greatness by design. Batman has trauma engineered into an origin built for merchandising. Virgil Hawkins had none of that. He was a kid in Dakota who got caught in a gang riot, hit with an experimental gas that mutated hundreds of people into so-called bang babies, and walked away with the ability to control electromagnetism completely by accident. No prophecy, no trust fund, no dead planet. Just a scared teenager who suddenly couldn't stop his own hands from sparking. That's not the origin story executives hand a flagship character. That's the origin story executives quietly bury. And it wasn't even a new story. The character came out of Milestone Media, an imprint founded years earlier on the idea that mainstream comics had spent decades underrepresenting anyone who wasn't the straight white default, and that the fix wasn't one token hero, it was an entire universe. Dakota City, the Dakotaverse, a whole world built to hold characters the rest of the industry hadn't bothered imagining. By the time Static made it to Saturday mornings, he wasn't just carrying his own origin story, he was carrying a mission statement that had already struggled to find shelf space once before, in print in the 90s. Static Shock premiered on Kids WB on September 23, 2000, with a pilot literally titled Shock to the System, and it did something no cartoon before it had done. It made a black superhero the lead of his own animated series, not a member of somebody else's team. Behind the scenes, the show was staffed by veterans of Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series, with Milestone Media co-creator Dwayne McDuffie brought in as writer and story editor. And through Virgil's side, from episode 1, was Richie, not a new sidekick invented to give the hero someone to talk to, but a kid who'd already been Virgil's best friend long before either of them had powers, the one who knew every version of him, awkward and unremarkable included. That history is what makes Richie's read carry weight instead of just enthusiasm. He wasn't projecting hope onto a stranger. He'd watched this specific, unremarkable kid up close for years and still walked away convinced there was something in him worth building a legacy around. He already believed the powers were wasted on someone who kept trying to quit being a hero, and he already treated Static as a legacy in the making instead of a phase he'd grow out of. Nobody else was that sure, least of all the industry actually paying for it. And the show didn't just tell you that about Richie, it tested it. In Sons of the Fathers, which aired that December, Richie gets kidnapped by Static's own archenemy, Ebon, in the middle of an episode that's already dealing with his father's open bigotry. And even as a hostage, scared, with a supervillain standing over him demanding to know how to contact Static, Richie plays dumb. He pretends the two of them aren't even close, then secretly keeps repeating his location into his communicator so Static can track him down. He protects the secret before he protects himself. That's not a kid tagging along for the ride. That's a kid who has already decided whose mission this is bigger than. Because here's the thing about kids animation in 2000. A show doesn't get renewed on ratings. It gets gets renewed on toys. And when Static Shock was first being pitched off the Milestone comic, the studio brought the character designs to a toy company to gauge interest in action figures. Static Shock's own voice actor, Phil Lamar, said years later that the toy company took one look at a black teenage superhero and passed, telling them flatly they didn't see a market for it. That decision, made before a single episode had aired, quietly capped the show's ceiling for its entire run. No action figures on shelves next to Batman and Superman. No fast food tie-ins with the reach those other franchises got. No merchandising war chest to point to when it came time to justify a 5th season. The show was being asked to survive in a business built on toy sales without ever getting a toy deal at all. And yet it kept climbing anyway. Static Shock became one of the highest rated shows on Saturday mornings. It won a Humanitas Prize for tackling real material, gun violence, racism, identity, inside a show technically rated for 7-year-olds. Dwayne McDuffie later joked that after 5 years on the air, the entire merchandising output of a top-rated superhero cartoon amounted to a fast food kids meal, 2 book adaptations, 1 DVD, and a single Game Boy Advance game. That's it. That's what a hit show got for being the wrong kind of hit. But here's where Gear's read on Virgil goes from supportive best friend to something closer to actual foresight. Because Richie didn't just believe in Static from the sidelines. He refused to stay a sidekick to it. By season 3, exposure to the same quantum residue that gave Virgil his powers had started rewriting Richie's own biology. And instead of hanging back at the gas station running tech support for the rest of the series, Richie built himself a suit and became Gear, a fully powered technopath in his own right. Because being Virgil's hype man from a distance was never going to be enough. He wanted to be standing next to the guy he already knew was going to matter. If there was ever a moment that should have shaken Richie's faith in this whole arrangement, it's season 2's Jimmy, which aired in May of 2002. It's the show's gun violence episode, directly inspired by Columbine, according to the series' own director, and it opens with Richie being carried into an ambulance after actually getting shot. Non-fatal, a leg wound, but the episode doesn't soften how close it was. This is the actual cost of being the best friend of a superhero in a city full of bang babies and loaded guns. And Richie doesn't walk away from it. He doesn't ask Virgil to quit, and he doesn't quit standing next to him either. If anything, it's the episode that sets up exactly why, 1 season later, he stops being the guy in danger on the sidelines and builds himself a suit. Even the writers seemed to know what they were building toward before the audience fully clocked it. In the season 4 premiere, Future Shock, Static gets thrown 40 years into the future while helping Batman and Robin, and runs headfirst into his own legacy, an older version of himself, one of the last surviving members of a future Justice League, fighting alongside an aged Batman and Warhawk to hold together a world most other heroes didn't survive. It's not subtext, it's the show, on screen, telling you that this Dakota kid with the homemade gauntlet grows up to be a Justice League legend at 60 years old. That wasn't a one-off either. Justice League Unlimited picked the thread back up in its own first season finale, The Once and Future Thing, confirming that same future timeline. Static, decades from now, still standing, still one of the very few heroes trusted to hold the line when almost everyone else is gone. 2 separate shows, 2 separate writing rooms, landing on the exact same read Richie had on his best friend back in episode 1. This guy doesn't wash out. This guy becomes one of the greats. And still, nobody on the business side of the equation was listening. In May of 2004, after 4 seasons and 52 episodes, Static Shock was canceled. Not because ratings collapsed. By most accounts, it was still a ratings powerhouse when the plug got pulled. It got canceled because a highly rated cartoon without a toy deal reads as a liability on a spreadsheet instead of an asset, and the industry that made that call years earlier never bothered to revisit the math. Now watch how long it takes for the rest of the timeline to admit Gear had the read right the whole time. 2004, canceled at the height of its ratings. 2005, McDuffie quietly confirms what the show could never say out loud about Richie, and almost nobody notices for years. 2011, Dwayne McDuffie dies at 49, without ever seeing Milestone or Static get the second chance he'd spent over a decade fighting to secure. 2020, at DC Fandom, DC finally announces the full revival of Milestone Media, alongside a live-action Static Shock movie in development, with Michael B. Jordan attached as a producer. That same event gives gives fans a 24-hour digital sampler just to prove the universe still has a pulse. February 2021, a new digital-first Static Shock comic launches the entire Milestone relaunch. Not a side character wheeled out for nostalgia, but the character chosen to lead the whole imprint back into existence. Later that year, Static gets a full print run, a second ongoing series, and a spot as the flagship face of one of the most important lines in Black Comics history. 2022, Warner Bros. Discovery's merger triggers a brutal cost-cutting purge across the entire DC slate. Batgirl gets shelved outright, tens of millions of dollars in finished footage thrown away. Static Shock's movie gets caught in the same freeze, and unlike other bigger budget projects, it survives it. Every single one of those data points is the same story playing out on a different scale. Doubted at the pitch meeting, doubted at the toy aisle, doubted at the cancellation, doubted by an industry that took over 15 years to even bring the character back, and every single time vindicated anyway, because the read was never actually wrong. It was just early, which is exactly what Gear was doing back in episode 1 of a kids cartoon in the year 2000. He wasn't hedging. He wasn't being a supportive friend for the sake of the plot. He looked at an awkward, accidental superhero with no chosen one backstory and no corporate backing behind him and decided, immediately and without evidence, that this was one of the greats. He held that read through a kidnapping he lied his way out of to protect it, through a gunshot wound that should have ended his willingness to stand anywhere near danger again, and through years of watching the industry around them treat the whole project as disposable. Decades of network doubt, toy aisle doubt, merger doubt, and industry doubt later, the future timeline agrees with him. Twice. Not as a rumor, not as fan theory, as canon, animated, on 2 separate shows 4 years apart. So take a step back from Virgil and Richie specifically, because the bigger point here isn't really about 2 characters in one canceled cartoon. It's about how often stories like this one get treated as the lesser bet the moment they leave the pitch room. Not because the writing is weaker or the character is thinner, but because somebody, somewhere, decided in advance what kind of hero was allowed to be a safe investment. Static Shock had the ratings, it had the awards, it had 2 separate future timelines confirming its lead character was Justice League material before the show had even finished its own run. None of that mattered as much as a toy executive's gut instinct in 1999, and it still took a global reckoning in 2020 for the industry to admit it had left money and a legacy sitting on the table for 16 years. Gear never needed that reckoning. He knew exactly what he was looking at the moment the gas station lights came on. And it's worth sitting with how many separate systems had to independently get it wrong for this to take as long as it did. The toy industry got it wrong in 1999, before a single frame was animated. The network got it wrong in 2004, canceling a top-rated show over a spreadsheet problem it created for itself. The broader culture got it wrong for over a decade by simply forgetting the show existed, letting a Humanitas Prize winner sit unavailable, while lesser, whiter, more heavily merchandised cartoons got remaster after remaster. Even the streaming era got it wrong, on a smaller scale, quietly pulling all 52 episodes off Max in a 2025 cost-cutting pass alongside Teen Titans and Justice League Unlimited, the exact same shows that had spent 2 decades confirming Richie's read was correct. Every one of those systems had access to the same evidence Gear had in episode 1. None of them were watching as closely as he was. So here's the actual question worth sitting with. How many other Virgils get the Gear treatment from exactly one person and never get the 20-year Vindication tour to prove it was deserved? For every Static Shock that eventually claws its way back through a fandom panel and a comeback comic, there are almost certainly other shows, other characters, other kids who were the best hero someone had ever written and simply never got the second act. Richie got to watch his best friend become one of the last members of the Justice League, on screen, in canon, not once, but twice. Most people who bet everything on someone before the world agreed with them don't get that confirmation at all. Drop your answer in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and check out the video on your screen right now.